Hey, this is Stephen Platinum, your friend in wrestling, dealing with somebody mowing the lawn. But it's Platinum versus Survivor Series 2020. I'm going to go about this a little different way. Mostly because I've had a chance to not only watch the show and take notes on it, but sort of see people's reactions to the show. And so I think it's more interesting to talk about what people's reactions to Survivor Series. And I would consider this a combination of fans, people who are loosely affiliated with the wrestling business, meaning people who like do podcasts and videos but aren't directly involved in a promotion, and then wrestling people. And their reactions to Survivor Series are as telling as, or more so, about the sort of state of wrestling and what's notable to me and what is not. To me, Survivor Series was a show that was, if you threw away everything before the main event and the farewell to The Undertaker, it would not matter at all. And I don't know at any point in wrestling where a show felt so inconsequential, yet people felt the need to idealize it and use their time to talk about the show more in relation to the state of wrestling and wrestling fans than the show itself. So most of the posts I would see would be like, here comes a slew of people complaining that Survivor Series used to be better, and then they would talk about that phenomenon. Or people pretending that that those matches leading up to the main event weren't shit. I've never seen people try harder to go like, oh, I think it's pretty good. It's pretty like it was. Those matches leading up to it either weren't good matches structurally, and that would be most of the men's matches, or they were complete horror shows in booking. Both of the Survivor Series matches, the women's one and the men's one, were terribly booked. But more than that, and then the women's Survivor Series, which was right before the main event, which is clearly used as a buffer, but a buffer between what I have no idea, because there were no good matches. Even Sasha and Asuka felt very mechanical, like they were just moving through their match, even though it was good. I guess besides the main event, it was probably the best match. I don't even know what that means. And all the matches were these kind of weird foregone conclusion matches. It was just really shitty. But then you're reminded of how, like, main events, I've always said, have two jobs, and that's to create the hype and live up to the hype. And even with the bad build and the rushed thing at the end about Drew McIntyre winning the title from Randy Orton so he could do this match, super great main events. Both of those guys, Drew McIntyre and Roman Reigns, but really Roman Reigns, right? You're really hitching your wagon on having a dragon that's so powerful that Drew McIntyre becomes the Dragon Slayer. Like, he really felt like Roman Reigns elevated him in this match. And even the commentators were a million times better in this match than the rest. The rest of the card they treated with this sort of flippancy, but this main event, they seemed to sense that, no, it's got to be great. And Samoa Joe describing, like, what does Drew McIntyre have to win? And he says, like, overwhelming violent force. Like, the commentators thing was elevated through this. But then, again, the WWE has this problem. They set up this world. It's like a science fiction or fantasy world in a book. You set up the physics and rules of your world, and then if you don't stick by them, something is really great is lost. Like, if you look at the last season of Game of Thrones, there's a lot of reasons why it was not successful. But the main reason is they seem to skew against the kind of physics and the rules for their world that they had set up. They had always taken their time with developments that were significant. And in the 8th season in particular, 7th season as well, things felt very rushed. And I think once you get into this feeling, if you're an audience, if you're a fan, of going, God, it feels like all of a sudden they're rushing to get to the end of this thing, whereas everything has always sort of unfurled and unfolded and made you feel very part of a very voyeuristic, like you were watching something happen in kind of a weird real time. That was part of the appeal of the show, that even if you didn't know it, and when that was taken away from you, you felt something was lost. And Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre, as great as that match was, two things really struck me as how much wrestling has changed, and not for the better. One was Drew McIntyre. At one point, they do a spot to quote unquote save Drew McIntyre, right, where he has Roman Reigns laid out with the Claymore kick, but the referee has gone down. Then he ends up losing because of, in part, the distraction and interference of Jey Uso. And then Roman Reigns locks in that guillotine, and then Drew is out, and the referee stops it. And then they just go on and on, the commentators, about how Roman Reigns won this match in very dominant fashion and all this shit. And no acknowledgement is made of the fact that Drew McIntyre probably had him beat, if not for the bad luck of the referee getting knocked down by Roman Reigns falling down from the Claymore kick. No mention is made of the fact that Drew McIntyre should have won. And I think something is really lost there. They tried to make it up by going, well, Drew McIntyre really did great too, but they don't acknowledge the fact that fucking the babyface should have won the match. And to me, there's something really, really screwy there. And then Drew McIntyre's there unconscious. Why would Miz not cash in? In the physics and logic of their world and the characters they have set up and the precedent they have set historically, Miz not cashing in makes zero fucking sense. I'm not going to talk about the rest of the matches because they don't warrant it. They really don't. The women's match, I'm looking at my notes. What a fucking clusterfuck of fuckery. Bayley, who's the only one who had the proper energy and who was setting the proper story of we're united, right? Whereas the Raw team has a quiet disdain. And let me give WWE and other wrestling people a hint. Quiet disdain does not read well to an audience. It shows a lack of energy and disinterest. You have to go a different route rather than quiet disdain. Better to have like an active hatred amongst the women on the Raw team than this sort of like quiet burning disdain. It just doesn't read an activity like pro wrestling very well at all when you have multiple people doing it. Maybe if it's two people, you can get away with it if they're really good performers. But 5 people doing it to each other, it's really fucking bad. And there's just blown spots all over the place. The camera work is shit. The production choices of the quick cuts in certain places was really bad. And Bayley, who had the proper energy and who's the best worker out of the other 9 put together aren't as good as Bayley. And so they eliminate Bayley first. So she's not there to help direct traffic in the rest of this fucking mess. But again, people would say, oh no, it was good. And the gobbledygooker stuff with Akira and R-Truth, like the weird juxtaposition of here's the 24/7 title, which we don't treat like it's part of the rest of this world, is very, I don't think people realize how strange that is. If it's true that the WWE is not pro wrestling per se, but like it's more like episodic television, their inability to blend the different elements is perhaps the most glaring weakness of the show that nobody talks about. Or certainly doesn't think is as important as it is. Now, the Undertaker farewell was fucking brilliant. I think bringing out all those people, but then not having them speak was really great. I think, Vince McMahon speaking for a little while was appropriate to introduce the Undertaker. Though the way his face looks because of plastic surgery and stuff, it's incredibly distracting, and it is also a reminder that everybody's gonna die. Which is maybe apropos for the Undertaker, but it is what it is. The video package was great. Undertaker coming to the ring, getting the appropriate amount of time for his entrance. I think his choices were really good. What he said was wonderful without lasting too long. I think the Paul Bearer thing that they threw in at the end was really cool. And it's the kind of thing that you can only get away with in wrestling without it feeling like exploitive or over the top. All great. The only small nitpick, and people are like, "Why are you even saying it?" Because it's so shitty. It's so unnecessary. So at a certain point, the Undertaker music, when they were doing the lightning stuff, when he was making his entrance, kind of went into this 8-bit sounding part of the music instead of just what it was originally. And it was so shitty and distracting and unnecessary. And again, just a choice that somebody made that somebody didn't go, no, we're just going to fucking do this thing in a classic feel. It's funny when the WWE does something that feels very classic, in the sense that they just sort of leave things untouched or let things sort of manifest or let a guy cut a promo that feels very spontaneous. It's always great, but yet they're afraid to do that. They're just one of these people that has to meddle. They get all George Lucas-y where it's like, well, we got to keep tweaking and we got to keep adding in ideas and we have to throw stuff out. And that's good during an editing process, but sometimes you just have to step back and go, we're gonna trust this. We're gonna set the stage where this thing can be as magical as possible, with the potential that something might screw up, rather than trying to tweak something that doesn't need to be tweaked. It's like, we're gonna give this horse, which is favored to win this race, we're going to give it a shot of fucking meth in its asshole right before the fucking opening bell rings. And because they don't realize that chances are that's actually going to fuck them at the end and might even kill the horse. In any case, I really did love the sort of Undertaker farewell. I'm going to admit something. Undertaker, though I understood the significance of him, and I remember the first time I really got to see that entrance live, I was overwhelmed by how cool it was, and he's really, really great. I would be lying if I said he was one of my favorites ever. He wasn't, but I thought that this was a very appropriate farewell. Hopefully he stay gone, as it were. And as for this Survivor Series, Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre did themselves huge favors, and everything else was shit. And the fact that people can't acknowledge or even notice that everything else was so bad in so many ways tells me the WWE has succeeded in something that it probably never thought it needed to, but it has lowered the bar so badly that even people who I consider very smart don't seem to be able to say out loud, wow, this is pretty shitty. Even if you enjoy something, you can acknowledge when it's not good. But now it seems like people feel like they're giving up something if they acknowledge the truth when it is a negative truth. But then we already knew that because of politics and the rest, didn't we? Anyway, this has been Platinum versus Survivor Series 2020 from Stephen Platinum, your friend in wrestling.